So in this video, we're looking at a shoulder flexion end range lift off with a dowel resting on our shins. This movement is probably going to be an eye-opener for a lot of people because it's going to help us identify how much control we actually have of our shoulder in end range flexion. This is something that will be great paired with something like a Pales Rails position, where we would have potentially opened up some workspace prior to doing this, and then this would occur kind of around 5 to 10 degrees around your end range of motion. What we want to make sure here is that we aren't using any momentum, we aren't rotating with our torso, and we're really trying to get pure shoulder flexion from what would be our glenohumeral joint. Now, in saying that, there does need to be a little bit of movement from the scapula. We kind of need to set it into a down and back position. Shoulder flexion is always going to have a degree of movement from the scapula in it as well, okay? So this position resting on the shin can actually be very useful, but for some it just might be a little bit too stressful on the ankle joint. So if you need to, say, place a mat underneath the knees to give it a little bit of comfort or ease, or if you even need to come up onto the toes, that's more than okay when you get into the position like so. This position also allows us to get a degree of flexion from the spine. So we want to focus as much as possible on tucking the rib cage down and probably biasing more of a flexed position with the spine to allow us to really focus on shoulder flexion. If we're in a lot of extension with the spine, it might actually be the case where we move through the spine when we raise up and we're thinking, hey, look, I've got all of this range of motion, but you've actually just extended the spine, which will allow for more shoulder flexion. But if we're looking at pure shoulder flexion, which is what we want to get out of this movement, we're going to try and bias that and get the spine into a little bit more flexion to really focus in on pure shoulder flexion, okay? So when getting into the position, you'll place your hand down on the ground as a little bit of a rooted position or kind of like a counterbalance, and we can use this to help us create some internal tension in our upper body, also stop us from rotating excessively with the trunk. What you want to do here is perform 1 or 2 reps with very little tension. Essentially just get into a position like so. As I said, a little bit of flexion coming from our thoracic spine, very little tension in the body, and just see and lift and raise and see how far you can go. You can see the stick is kind of far off the ground. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drop the stick, and this would be sort of my position from here. Now, as I said, I want to make sure that I'm about 5 or 10 degrees outside of the range of motion. So I am just going to drop my hand just a little bit. And this means that from here, I'm close enough to my end range that it's going to be difficult and challenging for me to actually raise up into shoulder flexion, but not so low that it's very easy and I can just lift up all day long and be like, well, I'm not really getting much effort here because there's just so much range, kind of using momentum to get into the end point. So as I said, raise up, drop the stick, then come out of that about 5 or 10 degrees, and that's your position that you're going to work from. As I said, we're going to try and counter that movement by keeping a lot of tension down on the front of the trunk, the rib cage staying down, and really trying to notice whether or not we actually rotate through the torso for this movement. But like most things that happen at end range, I want you to go through your radiation process. I want you to take a deep breath in, pack it into your lower abdomen, irradiate and create as much tension in the body as possible. That just means tensing every single muscle you can. Then tense up the muscles that are going to start flexing. Try to pull your shoulder blade into a down and back position, and then ever so slowly, tightest grip that you can on the dowel, start driving up, really focusing on the tissue around the shoulder. Control it down. Don't lose the tension just yet. Only when the dowel touches the ground do I want you to relax. Same again, big breath in, irradiate, tons of tension throughout the entire body. Keep that elbow locked. Drive, 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 get into your max range, come out of it slowly, relax. Let's do 1 rep, no talk, just to give you an idea of the level of tension that we get up to. And that's it, perfect. As I was saying, a few things to look out for would be the elbow bending. We want to do our best to keep our tricep engaged and keep our elbow locked. We also want to make sure that we don't necessarily like hike our shoulder blade up towards our ear. That's the idea of setting the shoulder blade down. Initially, we want to make sure that we sort of get that down and back position with the shoulder blade as we raise up into flexion. There is a degree of kind of upward rotation from the scapula, but we don't want that hiking up excessively, and that will mean that we'll probably end up bending that elbow if we end up allowing that shoulder blade to sort of hike up and raise towards the ear. So although it's sort of down, there is a degree of upward rotation that's going to occur when we go into that shoulder flexed position. There's a nice rhythm that needs to happen between the shoulder and the scapula, okay? So I'm sure there were lots of questions on that position, but a great movement if you're someone that needs to learn how to recapture and strength train within end range shoulder flexion. Ideally, you've probably paired that with something like a shoulder flexion pales rails to some degree. So if you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comment section. I'd be happy to answer. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to the page if you want to see more videos like this in the future. But for the moment, thanks, and I'll see you soon.